Hi everyone, Tony Tonkin here. Glad you could be with me for another one of my Tony Tonkin shows. Now, one of the things I wanted to discuss with everybody today is COVID real? Is it still here? And what are we doing about it? And the reason why I thought this was important is that there was an article in the ABC News site the other day which started to raise some questions for me about what are we doing? Why are we not focusing on COVID anymore? And has it actually gone away? And the reality is, no, it ain't. That we here in Australia are unfortunately at the forefront of fighting COVID, but because we have an election at the moment, no one seems to care. No one worries about it. No one wants to do anything about it. And it is still dominating our health system, and to a much lesser extent, for reasons I'll explain in a moment, how we're combating it. Now, there'll be lots of people out there who'd be really pleased that mandates have been dropped, that kids can go back to school, that we can go back to work, that we don't have to wear masks in shopping centres, lots of things, I guess, that we could celebrate. But the question I'm asking everybody today is that is it reality? There'll be lots of people who'll be saying, yes, it is, because we didn't believe in COVID in the first place. And I'm not here to argue that or not. I'm just here to actually talk about the statistics, the way that some people are talking about this, and why this is important for us to acknowledge. Are we really, at this particular point, burying our head in the sand? Now, my wife and I went off on Saturday to have our fourth COVID injection, vaccination, and also we had a flu vaccination while we were there. Now, the reason why we chose to do that is that we want to find a way to protect ourselves as best as we can, because I believe that there is every indication that Omicron is still out there doing its nasty deed, and that there are people who are getting infected, there are people who are hospitalised, there are people who are on ventilators, and there are people who are dying. And we need to be aware of this. And one of the issues that does concern me the most is that at the moment, no one seems to care. Politicians don't care. We hear about politicians becoming infected, but then who cares about them? And then we see them, a few weeks later, a week later, back on the trail doing their political thing, particularly around this time when we're having an election. But there are some statistics that are worth noting. Australia led the world in per capita COVID infections. This is according to a global database. If you ignore the tiny island of Montserrat, Anguilla and the Falklands, which are really small, not insignificant, but small islands, we're per capita, we're leading the world in infection. So we haven't dealt with it. We're still confronted by it. It's not in our community in a less significant way than what it was in the past. In fact, the indications are that it's just as dramatic and just as damaging now as it ever has been. Now, I guess one of the reasons for that is that we're not dealing with Delta anymore, we're dealing with Omicron. But this article here points out that the reality is that we don't know what other variants there will be. We don't know how this impacts our lungs and other organs. And as a result of that, we don't know what to expect in the future. And the question for me is, are we prepared for whatever may lie ahead? However, in Australia, hospitalisations and deaths are also tracking upwards, says this article, with the average number of COVID-related daily deaths hitting 40, doubling since March. Now, it also goes on to say we're looking at this kind of differently. We're now thinking COVID was in the past, and that there is this version of COVID that sat in the past, and then there's this other version which is the COVID now, and they're two different versions. Well, the reality is that they may not be. This article here talks about us having our heads in the sand, and I think to some extent we do. We're ignoring the key elements of why cases and hospitalisations have now increased, along with transmissions. And COVID now, he said, this is a guy who, this is Professor Crabb, said we have a massive impact on society. And he also goes on to say, and as a nation, we're also ignoring the health impact. How many of the 350,000 plus active cases in Australia right now will have chronic impacts? Overseas data suggests 10% of them, and that would impact your heart, impact your lungs, organs, and your brain. It's not nothing, he said. And I guess the point is that we need not be alarmist. But we need to wonder why the government has chosen to suddenly go from being extremely concerned, putting out daily briefings and so on, to doing absolutely nothing, which is what they've chosen to do now. We're at a point where COVID is now one of the major killers of Australians, and probably by the end of the year is going to be one of the top 3. This person told the ABC. So there are increasing numbers now. The number of deaths are increasing to the point whereby it will be the major determinant of whether or not we die from anything apart from natural causes. We don't know if one of these new variants will acquire the capacity to infect the lungs at the same degree that others do, say Delta, for example, she says. And hospitalisations will continue to go up as cases go up. And here we are ignoring the impact this has on our healthcare workers. And the healthcare workers are being burnt out. There's lots and lots of health. I think in Western Australia there's something like 1,200 healthcare workers who are off because of COVID. This impacts our system. Number of people infected by COVID obviously impacts businesses who will no longer be able to have staff to perform the functions of that business. And so it goes on. Now, I guess the question for me is that if the governments are choosing to do nothing about this, what's happening and why? You know, when there's a health crisis, as there was initially with regard to Omicron or Delta, Alpha then Delta, we were panicking. And maybe I can accept that perhaps we panicked too much, but then we've never seen anything like this for over 100 years. And I guess, you know, we were kind of worried that the Spanish flu was going to become kind of, as the Spanish flu became endemic, we were suggesting that perhaps this would as well, and it has. And we as a country are not probably dealing with it as best as we can. Does that mean we need to be locked down? Probably not. We're all over it. The fact is we're all fatigued. Now, because we're fatigued from something doesn't necessarily mean that we have to then start to ignore it. And I think this is the call, that we are at a point whereby we are ignoring, we're burying our heads in the sand, and we're making out that this doesn't exist until it hits us personally. I'm doing all I can to prevent myself from becoming ill. I'm hoping that you doing what you can to prevent yourself from becoming ill. I'm very cautious of where I go, who I meet. I really don't like going to the shopping centre because, you know, who knows who you're going to brush against who might have COVID. I don't want to have to get it. When I get the flu, it's usually pretty terrible. I don't really want to have to experience COVID as well. So, are we ignoring it? Should we be developing more public health policy around this, or should we just spend the rest of our time making out that it doesn't exist? What do you think?